I am delighted to be talking today to Iona Ledwidge. Now, Iona is the CEO of Resurgo, and Resurgo is a charity predominantly that has an award-winning program called the SPEAR program, where they interview, train, coach young unemployed individuals into sustainable employment. And Iona, she's born and bred actually pretty much. She joined Resurgo in her late 20s and has worked her way up to become the CEO. She's got such a gravitas, such an earnestness for coaching and for young people and for creating team that is built on the pillars of trust and connection. And this conversation, you'll just hear it eking out of her. There's such a richness to her approach for working with individuals, whether they're young, unemployed, or whether they're her team members. So let's dive in. Iona, it is such a pleasure to have you on the Extraordinary Leaders podcast this week. How are you?
I'm really well, thank you. It's great to be here. Great to be with you, Dolly, and to hear about your new book.
I know, the new book, Extraordinary Leader. You can get it on my website, everybody. I'm very excited.
Absolutely. Great.
Thanks,
get that pitch in there early on.
Totally. Absolutely. So, Iona, what does extraordinary leadership mean to you?
Well, I was thinking about this and I love the word ordinary because I think we are all so ordinary. And I think back to 16 years ago when I joined Resurgo, when I started training up as a coach. And I think the extra for me has been the investment that other people have made into me, into my very ordinary self, my very ordinary skills, and really helping me to grow. And that's something that's become a belief system for me, a way of life. And I really love, coaching. What we do is coach young people into sustainable employment, young people who are lacking opportunity, lacking aspiration. And I love seeing them come to life, but I also have loved investing in my team and helping release and unlock potential in them. And I think what's amazing about ordinary people, which we all are, is that you don't know how extraordinary someone could be. And so much of it is about sowing seeds and trusting and believing in people. We talk about the law of expectation, actually what you expect is what you'll get. So sometimes if someone's underperforming, you need to really expect more from them and even call more out of them and see what extraordinary things could be unlocked and revealed. So that's what came up for me when you shared that question.
I love that. There's something I just want to unpack a little bit, is that sometimes when I tell people about ordinary, how we all share in our ordinariness, and you've just alluded to it, we are all ordinary. It's funny, some people say to me, "Oh, speak for yourself. I don't want to be average. I'm not average. I'm not ordinary." We're not saying that. I'm not saying that. I don't think you are. There's something about being ordinary, like redefining ordinary, isn't it? And I think in a world that is so target-driven, performance-led, I mean, even just the way we do socializing online is kind of look at my brand, look at my Facebook, look at my Instagram, look at my TikTok. It's all about the self. It's so kind of strive, perform, brand. And actually that's just exhausting, is it not? Yeah. And there's something lovely about going, we're all fish swimming around in a jolly big tank together, right?
Yeah. I was thinking about, I heard Tyler Staton speak recently. He runs a church in Portland, Oregon, and he was talking about faithfulness, actually. And he said, fidelity is boring, but the fruit of fidelity is beautiful. And it really struck me because that's what we all want, is we want the fruit of someone living an ordinary life really, really well.
Yes.
And I think there is something about being consistent, showing up, being present, being there in the highs and in the lows. I think that's something that I've tried to do as a leader, telling people the real stuff, telling people when you're not doing well, being vulnerable, being honest, telling people when they've let you down, being honest with them in relationship. But I think there is something about the showing up and the main and the plain of the day to day that I think is so important. And I think in the cult of self and the rise of the brand, the kind of me brand, I think we lose the power of coming together and the power of, if I just put in my little bit, that's enough, because it's not really about me. It's about us. It's about we. It's about coming together.
It is. It's so funny, isn't it? Because you said a word that I think is so key. It's about consistency and showing up. And actually, I often say in business, to build slow and build thorough, which is almost counterintuitive to startups, scale-ups, fast-paced things. But you can have, I talk a lot about holding two opposing truths in tension. And I'm sort of coming at it from that point, that to build slow and thorough is to recognise our humanness, our borders and our boundaries, and actually that it can't all be about the self performing and being extraordinary and amazing, because we'll just burn out and we'll be like a microwave meal that just is fast food and it's gone here today, gone tomorrow. And it is about the principles we have underpinning our approach to leadership and to those around us. It has to be quite slow and thorough, and which means the humdrum, the Tuesday mornings, the Thursday afternoons of just turning up, showing up, keeping your cool,
Yeah, and there's a relief in knowing that it's not all about me. I mean, thank goodness. Thank goodness it's not all about me, because if it was, we'd all be doomed.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
I say to the team, coaching in the training room, running the SPEAR program with young people, it's really tough work. It's demanding, we're in a mental health epidemic. We know that we've got almost 1 million young people in the UK are unemployed. We have safeguarding issues constantly. So the team are young people dealing with this stuff day in, day out. But I say to them, you know what? You don't have to be exceptional. It's about showing up. It's about being consistent. And I love Carl Rogers, who talks about the 3 core conditions for change. He said, the 3 core conditions for change are unconditional positive regard, genuineness, and congruence. And then when he did some more sort of experimentation, he said, actually, the only one you need is unconditional positive regard. And he was talking in a therapeutic context with clients and how they change over time. But a lot of coaching has come from sort of therapeutic strands and been developed out of those places. Wow. And he talks about, actually unconditional positive regard essentially is unconditional love. And what does that look like in a professional context? It looks like showing up. It looks like expecting the best of people. It looks like offering support and offering challenge, being real, being authentic. And that's it. Hold it, so how encouraging that essentially holding space for another person or a group of people can bring about change. We run a coaching for leadership program, and I observe people at the end of the program. We assess them, and I observe people doing one-to-one. Sometimes they've done a really average one-to-one. And the person having the one-to-one, who's a volunteer, comes in, is often like, that was so great to be listened to. That was just so great. And you realize the power of being listened to, of being heard, is really significant. And actually, we don't need to do all these sort of fancy interventions all the time and work really hard to lead people. Obviously that there is some skill to really great coaching, but I think for me, that's really encouraging that on a bad day, in our most ordinary selves, we're enough.
That thing of holding space, which is a bit of a therapeutic sentence, but just giving someone some time. And I talk about it in my book about this aeration chamber. And it's that coaching is a bit like with red wine. You decant red wine into a glass, jug.
Yes.
To let the enzymes connect more with oxygen, and loads of things happen, like toxins come out, the flavour gets more bodied because there's more oxygen in the enzymes to make them react differently. So you get a fuller flavour where they were trapped before. And there's something about coaching, holding a space, or just having a jolly good listen to someone. Like that's sometimes what coaching is. It's putting someone in that aeration space and being decanted, isn't it, to see where the toxins are that need to come out, the things that need to be processed, the thoughts that need to be finalised, the potential to be unlocked. How would you define coaching? Because it's a funny one, coaching, isn't it? Lots of people have different definitions, and you're a professional coach. What is coaching?
One of the first things I did when I came into the role as CEO was take all of my senior leadership team and the tier down, our heads of department, out for coffee one-to-one. And I just said, this is your time. Tell me whatever you want. What's working? What isn't working?
Nice.
What are the big challenges you think we're facing as an organization? What are the things that might be my blind spots, our blind spots that we're not alert to? And also, how are you? It was basically a kind of, right from the macro to the personal. And it was such an amazing time of conversations. And I would just listen to people. And I remember what my director of strategy said to me, and I was writing notes. She was like, I feel like that was such a productive hour.
No way.
And I realized all I've done is listen and write down notes. But she felt heard. And obviously then, you have to do something with that or decide not to do something with that and let people know, I'm taking your thoughts forwards. This is how I've responded. But the essence of listening, and perhaps that leads into what is coaching. I think right at the foundations of coaching is trust. It's all about an adult to adult thought partnership of trust. And that's where expectation comes in. If I'm going into a dynamic and I feel intimidated by people, or I feel irritated and I go in feeling like this person really doesn't know what they're doing, that skews the dynamic. So I think at the foundation, I believe trust is really right at the heart of building a great coaching relationship. And that can be one-to-one, but that can also be groups, teams, all sorts of dynamics. And essentially it's listening and asking incisive questions in order to release, unlock potential in someone or a group of people. And it's as simple and as multi-layered and complex as that, I guess.
It's that thing, isn't it, of keep it simple, stupid, the KISS thing.
Yes.
The simplest things are the most impactful, but they're not simplistic. That's the point, isn't it? It's funny, what you've just shared is actually, for anyone listening who's a leader or in a team who's not being coached or not coaching or having a team not coach, right there is a level up opportunity, isn't it? But it's time consuming and it feels not fast foody. It doesn't feel that we want microwave. We want like, quick, what's the top 3 tips? And actually to just go and listen with a pad and paper and obviously have action on the back of it. But to take that time is probably the most effective one-to-one you could have with your team.
It's been amazing. People reference back to it. Or recently the other day, I knew that one of our heads of department was feeling a bit undervalued. And I just was like, let's have some time. And, she started crying and opening up and talking about feeling undervalued. And we had a great conversation. And I was able to say, look, we really value you. Yeah. I'm sorry for some things that have happened. We want to make some things change. Help me to help you. We're in this together. This isn't a parent-child dynamic. I think that's really important to me, is a leveling out of dynamics, trying to create a non-hierarchical organization where I'm approachable and people feel like they can come to me with anything. But there's also the giant phenomenon, which is when you are a leader, and I found this shifting from being a director on the senior leadership team to stepping up into CEO role, people do treat you different because they're like, you're the boss. And even in a charity that's non-hierarchical, very relational, of course it's understandable. And I remember hearing my predecessor Jo talk. She'd gone to hear a basketball player speak, and I can't remember who it was now, but he was saying, I'm a giant. So when I go into a room and it's a cocktail party, I turn around and I can knock over a tray of drinks with just a small movement. And he used the analogy that as leaders, we can make a small move and it can have a big impact. So we need to be really thoughtful about how we conduct ourselves. Moments where I'm like, I walked past that person and maybe I didn't smile today. I mean, it sounds so small, but it's like, I hope they didn't think that I was being really cold, because people can really interpret those things and take them on.
That's a very, very insightful point about leadership, that especially in spaces where we don't want it to be hierarchical, we want it to be more level playing field, because that's where the trust comes from, isn't it? That's where we're all connecting hands to the pump. But it is really important to have a reverence. I've talked about this before in the podcast, that an aeroplane, I find this fascinating, and any aviation people might phone me and go, that's not true. But I have read this, so I think it is.
And I'd say go for it, Dolly.
Let's just go large or go home, right?
Come on.
So,
yeah, exactly.
Aeroplanes don't crash because of a sudden, massive, unforeseen thing for the most part. It's not that there's suddenly like the plane snaps in two or the wing falls off. They crash because of lots of small, seemingly innocuous events that we're negligent to, that come together. And so if you're a pilot or an air steward, you have to be really, the word I read, which I love, was reverent, because there is a sense of like, this is life and death, actually. So reverent for the small things going wrong. So if the toilet light goes off and isn't working, doesn't matter. Don't need to worry about it. It's just a toilet light. Actually, it does matter, because we have to care for the smallest things in order to care for the biggest things. We know this just being customers in businesses. If, I've got a company that helps me with something, and I know that in the past, when they've not taken note of the small things, it makes me go, I don't want to give them more responsibility. If they can't do something small, then what about the big? And it is about this having a reverence in leadership for the small things, for the person who you work with that you don't really have one-to-ones with because they're always busy and they look all right. Have a reverence for that, because that negligence could cause a crash, actually, long term, couldn't it?
Yeah, it's such a good point. And something that's small to you, that you think is small, might not be small to the other person, right? You think, oh, that's not a big thing. That's not a big deal. And that's where diversity is important. And that's something we're working on, building diversity across the organization, not for the sake of diversity, but I want diversity of thought. I want people to be saying, these are your blind spots, Iona. This is the senior leadership team's blind spots. These are the things that you're not thinking about. Because going back to the airplane example, I've actually read an example of that. I think it was in the book Rebel Ideas by Matthew Said, but I could be wrong, around dominance hierarchy. Often people are afraid in a dominance hierarchy, even where it's a life and death situation, to say the small things that they notice because they're fearful.
Yeah. Well, that comes from the aviation world, and now they have new rules in place, because it used to be the captain of the plane had autonomy on everything, and so no one would say anything if they were scared of him, or generally it was him then. And so that is the thing, someone having too much control. I mean, we've got church backgrounds, haven't we? And you see that in systems that are very hierarchically structured, like a priest or a vicar. They don't really have much accountability in their leadership role, and they represent something so much bigger than themselves, which is like God. Or you have a headmaster or a mistress of a school, and they have such massive amount of responsibility that no one can really question.
Which is scary. And we've seen instances, obviously, recently. And,
it always comes tumbling down, doesn't it? Because of
people
it.
who haven't set up enough accountability structures around them. And I think it's really important. I think for us, right at the heart of being a coaching and an impact-led organization is feedback. And our feedback culture is really key. But what does that actually mean? I was talking to a consultant who's doing some work with us at the moment, and he was saying to me, I've noticed that you seem to be really good at getting people to do things that maybe they don't want to do. So how do you do that?
And how
and
do you do that?
Well, I was wondering, I was like, do I? I don't. It's not manipulation. That's not intentional. But I did say, I do think this expect the best of people is a really important starting point. And I haven't always done that out of my own insecurity or imposter syndrome, or often like going into rooms and feeling intimidated when I was, coaching lots of more senior, older leaders in business. I'd go in and think, oh, they probably think X about me. They probably think I don't know what I'm doing, and therefore I'm sort of already going in with a defensive posture rather than thinking the best
dynamic.
of them.
You talked about dynamic before, like already the dynamic's off, isn't it?
Exactly. The sort of, I'm going in a sort of child posture rather than an adult to adult posture. But I said to him, I think it is about a consistent, high support, high challenge approach with people. And, he's trying to sort of invest in someone on our team and train them up whilst he's with us for a short time. And I said, it's great to have a belief that you want to go in all high support, but actually when the demands of work come in and the pressure of deadlines arrive, I said, I think you swing from sort of high support and I'm training this person up to high challenge, low support.
Yeah.
And it's just like, okay, go, get it done, or I'll just take it back from you. And I said, I wonder if there's in the mix a fear of not being liked. And he said, I think, that does resonate, actually. I think that is true. And I said, you've got to be prepared not to be liked by people.
Oh, that's horrible, but true. Let's just stay on that for a sec. What do you, go on, what does that mean? Let's go there.
Well, I think you have, in order to challenge people, you've got to be okay with people not liking you, right? Mm-hmm. And actually, ultimately, I'd rather be respected than liked. When you have to make difficult decisions, as you do when you're leading anything, if you can be honest, make a difficult decision and see it through in spite of difficult consequences, people do respect you. They might not agree with you. They might not like the decision itself.
Yeah.
And with feedback, of course, it can feel really personal. And sometimes it is personal. Sometimes it's like, you need to dress smarter, or you need to actually turn up on time. The simple things that some of the younger generation can struggle with. No, you can't work from home today again.
Yeah. And that's the end of that. Come on.
Yeah,
exactly.
The tough love. But ultimately, those are the things that build trust over time, because people see, if it's not just lip service, if you're practicing what you preach, if you're a person of integrity, and you're also prepared to take feedback and not just take feedback, but invite feedback. And I think, again, with that sort of giant phenomenon in play, as leaders, we need to actively seek out feedback and say, I'd love your feedback. I really want to welcome your feedback to me. Please feel free to, I took out our diversity and inclusion manager for lunch the other day, and I said, how am I doing? Tell me what my blind spots are. I want to know.
Nice. I think that's a great question, is tell me what my blind spots are. It's very different to doing a project or a talk and going, how was I? Just waiting for the critique. It's I feel like with feedback, we almost need a new lexicon to house it effectively, because when we say positive things, people are just waiting for the bad bits. Equally, we can say, oh, I really want feedback. Oh, I'm really good at listening. I'm a leader. I'll hear the feedback. But you can just see that their eyes are nodding, their face is nodding, but their eyes are shut, like internally shut. They're just like, I'm not
and it needs to be much more of a flow. Like
100%.
It's just a conversation. Judith Glazier, I think that's how you say her name. She talks about, she's got a book called Conversational Intelligence, and it's a conversation, and it needs to be part of our dialogue. We need to catch people doing things well. Nancy Klein, who writes Time to Think, that we're reading all together as I have with the heads of department.
Great book.
Yeah, it's a great book, and I read it years ago, and I thought we need to become more of a thinking organisation. and we're working towards how do we create space for that. But she says you need 5 times more encouragement than criticism. So catch people doing things well, look for opportunities to celebrate people, and honor the wins that people
100%.
are having. So that when you do say, oh, that thing annoyed me, or that was frustrating, it doesn't feel so weighty. It's not like, I now have some feedback to give to you. And it's a feedback slot, and everyone's kind of got that
brace.
Yeah, exactly.
Brace.
It's like, it's just part of life.
You're right. You're so right. If it's
part
normalized.
of the flow of conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I love, Brene Brown has this great analogy, which is about trust. And she writes, I think it's in her first book, Daring Greatly, but she writes about her kid's teacher, and they all put the kid's teacher will put marbles in the jar, a marble in a jar, when the kid, any kid in the class does something well. So they could do something nice for another child. They do a good job somehow. She puts a marble in the jar, and it's all this picture is one of building trust, and that's how trust builds slowly, one marble at a time in a big jar. And I think that we need to be doing that, and our jars need to be full. We need a baseline of trust to have the difficult conversations, right? And then we, as recipients, need to not like throw out the whole jar of marbles if someone says, you didn't do that very well, Iona.
How would you encourage a leader of a team listening who's like, I want more feedback, but we just don't really do it? What would be your steps to building that culture?
I think I would just say, start with some encouragement. Start with just catch people. I like that phrase. It's a phrase that my old coach, Joe Roberts, used to use. Catch people doing things well. Nice. I'm not a parent, but I think that's what parents do. It's like, you did that great. You got out of the house on time. You tied your shoes up yourself. Yeah, right. In this moment, you cleared your plate and put it in the dishwasher. I don't know. Because you're trying to reinforce that you're for someone.
Yeah.
If you don't have that culture of trust, and Patrick Lencioni talks about, the absence of trust, then what you will have is artificial harmony. People will be smiling and nodding and basically hating on you behind your back. Yeah. And I've worked with organizations like that, where people are like very passive aggressive, and I'd never tell them that. Like, why not? Oh, because they, they never.
The point? I
exactly
give it away.
What's the point? And they never turn up for the meetings, and they book the annual leave without permission, and everything's sort of this sideways action where people are doing things behind each other's backs, and it's so toxic.
It's like slow toxic to live on, isn't it? It will burn you out. Over time, it'll start to just corrode at life. I think that's the thing with toxic cultures, is that they're okay. They're never something that's toxic. It's like on a continuum, isn't it? Something that's going to be so awful and you've got to get out right now. But actually, there is that proverb that says, beware the little foxes. They do not eat the vineyards. We both know that one. And it's that thing of these little foxes, these little toxic cultures that actually do erode where the fruit of life is, and the fruit of growth in business. And business comes from relationships, being people by people all the time. And if the relationships aren't working and they're being corroded by these little foxes of eye rolls, of resentments, of not communicating clearly, that's what's so huge about this stuff, and having to have that reverence for the small things as we go along, and coming back round full circle. Like, coaching is an amazing space to aerate some toxicity and to process some stuff, to realign and reestablish, isn't it? Yeah.
And we need to model what we want to see, right? So, we don't have a toxic culture here. We have a great culture. However, sometimes things come back to me and I'm like, no, that's not how we're going to speak about that person. That's not okay. Just little moments and things. And we have to model. And, I catch myself sometimes if I'm like having a bad day. Oh, that was really frustrating. It's like, okay, but we need to be honoring people. It's like that holy gossip thing of like, say great things about people behind their back.
Nice. Yeah.
So I think it is the catching the little foxes, and as leaders really modeling what we want to see. And going back to what you were saying about if a leader's trying to start out on creating more of a feedback culture, I think it is make it a natural, habitual part of conversation that you're catching people doing things well, and it will become easier to say that was difficult, that was frustrating, and then live it out yourself and invite people to give you feedback as well. I think you'll probably be surprised.
Yeah. I mean, my dad, who's been on the pod before, he has run a business for 55 years, I think, maybe longer.
Wow.
But he's got his note card at the top of every page. It always says, it has three things he says, but one of them is, I've noticed. And that's what he does. So he goes up to you and he's, I've noticed that you do X, Y, and Z. I've noticed. It's just what we're saying, like the good things that people do. I've noticed. What have you noticed? It's a great way of just starting it like, oh, I've noticed that you, for example, I've noticed that you speak very eloquently. And I've noticed that it's really
Dolly.
pleasing.
Great, keep it coming.
Exactly. But, today's hilarious. I've got some kids. And I did it today with one of my boys. He's lost his earpods and he was looking for them before the school run. And
like me, I lost my AirPods yesterday. Do you know where they were?
Where?
I called the pub I was like, they've last been seen in the pub. And he was like, oh, no, it's not here. In the lining of my coat, there was a hole in my pocket.
That's brilliant. No, that's a really sad thing. That's not your fault. Barney's lost his, and I noticed that he was dealing with it really well. So I said, Barney, I've noticed that you are doing so well with being frustrated at losing your AirPods. And he went, I'm not doing well. I've just been swearing my head off. I went, oh, well, that's not good. Don't do that. So I noticed something great, which I incorrectly noticed. And then he proceeded to be so grumpy the whole way to the bus.
Oh, bless him.
I know, funny.
He probably appreciated that you noticed something good about him.
I just got to notice
he was
the right.
swearing his head off.
Memo to everyone: notice the right things, not the wrong things. As we come into land, I just want to touch briefly on this thing of imposter syndrome. You alluded to it a moment before. You've talked about different dynamics, and it's a big topic that comes up time and time again. But what are your observations with imposter syndrome, and what are your techniques for helping people overcome it?
I have definitely experienced imposter syndrome. I started life at Resurgo in my late 20s. I trained as an actor and was acting for a few years. I worked for another charity. I retrained as a counsellor, so I'm a counsellor, and then I came along and started training as a coach at Resurgo. I definitely felt this sense of, who am I to be working with these young people? I'm bright white middle class. And then I found that actually the young people we work with, turns out all they want is for you to be a human and be your authentic self and be real with them. And, I remember having a conversation with a guy who'd come out of a gang, and I was essentially calling leadership out of him and saying, who do you want to be? And I remember that as a powerful moment of connection. And I observed something through that process of, okay, something shifting in the way I'm seeing myself in this, but ultimately it's through doing the stuff, through practicing, through backing myself. I think I went through a bigger process over the years of then when I was coaching in businesses and coaching people who I perceived to be more intimidating, have more experience than me, the kind of who am I phenomenon. And I remember my coach at the time, he said to me, Iona, I think you need to go do a program and benchmark yourself against other people in the sector, because I don't think you know how good you are as a coach. So I went and did a course with the Academy of Executive Coaching in 2016. And off the back of that, I trained to get my Master Coach accreditation through the International Coaching Federation. And I had lots of coaching, had lots of input. This guy who's a master coach, Duncan Kopok, he said, you'll probably fail. Most people do first time. Remarkably, I actually passed first time, but he was sort of challenging me and saying, like, how committed are you to this process? Like, how determined are you? And I think there's something probably shifted through that process of really starting to believe in myself and saying, oh, maybe I do have something to offer. And I think perhaps as well, when you start to get out of your own head and stop thinking about yourself, and you actually train up other people, so you give it away, you become much more others-centric. It shifts how you see yourself. So one of the things that I'm really proud of is that I've trained up around 30 coaches to get their ICF accreditation. We've got young people in our organization. They're trained at, up to PCC level. And I feel really proud of the investment I've made in younger people coming through the system and then getting them to believe in themselves. And, we just got one of them's just got an award. And so I think perhaps giving back has helped me see myself differently, but is also, I love kind of removing some of the hurdles that I've had to jump over out of the road for younger people and passing the baton on to the next generation. That's something I'm really passionate about.
What I've heard in your answer there with imposter syndrome, because I often get asked to coach people for imposter syndrome, and often it's one of those kind of foggy words. It's a bit like communication. Oh, we need better communication. Like, what does that even mean? What's not working? What is? What methods? We've got to break it down, haven't we? And imposter syndrome is another one of those big blanket terms. But what I'm hearing is that old thing of like, am I enough in this room? Am I enough in this role? Am I enough in this space? And if for many of us we go, I don't know if I am, then we land into this space of, I'm an imposter, I shouldn't be here. But in that place, if you don't feel enough, there are two things I've heard you do that I think are really practical. One is go and get a skill, go and train in something to fill that gap. Like, there are practical things you can do and for one person, they might say, oh, you don't need to do that. But the next person might say, yeah, do. So, like, for example, I'm quite keen to do an MBA, and I've heard people say, oh, don't bother, Dolly, you just don't need to. And I probably don't, and it's a lot of money, and I don't know if I will or won't yet. But I think for me, that's an area that actually might just give me a bit more of the boost I want and need sometimes in a room when I might not feel enough. But it's not a one-size-fits-all, is it, for the skill gap? So it's finding the skill gap that you feel you have and filling that in with to get more credible, benchmarking it like your coach said. And the other thing I heard you say is giving away your wisdom, giving away your gift, giving away your space a little bit. Because I used to be a mentor a lot to teenagers as well, funnily enough, and I found it was such a growth journey for me in growing in leadership to give to others. Just through osmosis, you just start to feel bigger and stronger, just like you have more to offer, right?
Yeah. And I think, going back to what we were saying earlier about the cult of self, it gets us out of our own heads.
Nice.
It gets us out of the overthinking space. And I think I would encourage people, leaders also, to connect with the reality of what's going on outside of your space as well. So for me, within my space, I'm trying to connect more with the young people, because it's easy to go through, a week or a month without really connecting in and reminding myself of my why. And I think that's important for us as leaders to do, is like, you're holding the vision, but also connecting with the reality on the ground. But I do think, if that's not your space, as a leader, what better thing than going and offer a mock interview to a young person who lives in your local community. We've got 17 sphere centres across the UK now, where we engage with business professionals, and they can come in for an afternoon for an hour or two, and they leave feeling so lifted, because it's like, this is a local young person. I've had a chance to interview them for a real job that they've applied for. I've given them some feedback. They've interviewed me about how I've got to where I am in my career. And then they get to affirm the young person publicly in their group. And the young people leave buzzing. But I think these professionals leave even more
100%.
buzzing.
100%. My mum, I mean, it's that old thing, give and you'll get. Like my mum used to say when I was a bit Mona Jonah, she'd go and do something for someone else. Go and take the lady next door's dog for a walk. Oh, I don't want to, I'm having a bad day. Just do it. And I would come back feeling great. It is such a beautiful human principle that when we give of any part of ourselves to others, we do feel better, don't we?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Iona, what I like to land on in these conversations is very profound. Extremely profound question.
Okay, I'm ready. I'm so ready, Dolly.
I hope you read it in the notes to be prepared. What household item, do you have that personifies extraordinary leadership and why?
I was thinking about what inspires me, and we'll just try this. This
Go on, let's go for it.
This might but this isn't my plant because it's one of the office plants. But I have to say, at home, I'm surrounded by plants. I love plants. I love being in the presence of living organisms. And I think when you have to look after something and you realise, like the other day, I realised I'd massively overwatered this plant and it was waterlogged. And I pulled it up and I realised I disconnected it from its roots. So I've replanted and potted it. It's not doing very well. I'm trying to nurture it. I think when you lead people, people are a bit like plants and they like certain things, they don't like other things. And obviously we're not going to be led by people's likes and dislikes all the time. But I think there is an attunement that is really important to be alert to, that actually when you're a leader, what are you doing? Yes, you're setting vision, but ultimately you're leading people. And we need to be attuned to what is going on at every level of an organization. And I think that being around plants really helps me. So there we go.
There is something so true about borrowing from what's already in nature to help us with our leadership. So I have a few episodes ago interviewed a lady called Julia Parker, who is a gardener. I mean, she's got a big following on Instagram, but I was wanting to learn from her. What can we learn from the ecosystems of our gardens?
Oh yes, please. I'm gonna listen to
you'll
that.
like that episode. But it's to bring into our leadership spaces when it comes to growing people and growing, because the people are the ones that drive the projects, drive the profit,
absolutely.
drive it all. Yeah, and so it's in keeping with that, Iona.
Yeah.
So you're
I don't know if you've watched the film Wilding, but I would highly recommend it.
Oh, I
Wilding.
will. What is it?
It is about Knepp Castle. I don't know if you've heard about or read about what they've been doing there, but it was a land that was farmed for many years, and they've essentially rewilded the land because the soil was being destroyed by chemicals. And they had this guy come and he said the trees are dying, and the mycorrhizal network underground where the trees connect is being destroyed. And so they introduced ancient herds of animals and they've rewilded the land, and they have like the most extraordinary birds and creatures, birds that have been like becoming extinct, coming and arriving at their land. And it looks like this crazy ancient, they sort of show drones hovering over the land, and it looks extraordinary. And I don't know, I think there's loads to learn about that. I think one final thing I'll say is, one of the things, maybe linking into imposter syndrome, one of the things that my coach and I have been thinking about is U theory. And this concept of when you go down into a dip, actually trusting the process that new life will reemerge. And I love that film because it's all about actually trusting nature to take over, not taking too much control, not feeling like we need to hold things too tightly in our grip, but actually trusting ourselves, trusting God, trusting the process, that where there is a shedding of life or where things are going wrong, that new life will emerge. And I think that's part of what I'm learning even this year as I start being a CEO.
It's a really beautiful and profound place to land because it's the seasons, isn't it? And I remember always thinking that after winter, spring always comes. And actually,
That
but
was
there are,
that was
but
the other thing I was going to bring was a
yeah,
framed picture which I have on my desk, and it says after winter must come spring.
there you go. And it's true, but even after summer must come winter. And so it's when it just means that we can never be static and go for comfort, because when we're in comfort, when contentment, it becomes a very stagnant place where there's no growth. And so there has to be winter, and winter's a gift.
Yeah.
And pain and difficult seasons are a gift. So, I've had people, guests on the show who've been through chronic redundancy stories and themselves, or having to make hundreds of other people redundant, for example, lost jobs, lost money. And it's so awful, or going through divorce, or going through whatever it is, these painful winter seasons. But actually, spring does come. But if it's summer, don't get too comfy, because you will stay stagnant. So we need to embrace the difficulty and think, great, there are blind spots in my leadership. I'm leaning into that. Great, my team aren't performing. That's really painful and wintry and difficult. We've got lots of dynamics. It is a bit toxic. But let's lean into this barren space, isn't it? And see what can we do in order to get to the spring. Iona, it's been so lovely and glorious having you on the show. You've got
Thank you
such
so much.
a
I've loved it. What a great
beautiful
chat.
presence. Yeah, it's been gorgeous. We'd love to have you on it again. Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Dolly. Anytime. It would be an absolute pleasure. I really enjoyed chatting to you. Okay. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. What a rich conversation that was with Iona. And something I think I'm really taking from it, as she talked about the rewilding at the end to let the land heal almost, from that documentary. I was thinking about, at the beginning, she talked about when she took over as CEO and went up to each of her employees and said, let's just chat. How are you? What's working? What's not? Where are my blind spots? How are you? What do you need more of? What do you need less of? It almost is like a rewilding conversation. Often with our one-to-ones, we're so direct and focused and clinical about targets and process and development. But how about just having a one-to-one with people, coaching style, just rewilding it a little bit? How are you? Let's just hang out. What's working? Where am I getting things right and wrong? There's such a freedom in that. So I think that's what I'm going to take away with me from this conversation. And if you are in a situation where you would like some rewilding, then I'd suggest you need coaching. So do get in touch with me, as I can help, or I can put you in touch with people who might be just the job for you to have a rewilding conversation.